Hi, I'm Laura, and welcome to the PIRATEx Deep Dive, where key personalities of the world of events and the experience economy join me to share their stories and their take on the future of the industry. In each episode, you will find a lot of helpful insights and learnings to bring your event game to the next level.
PIRATEx Deep Dive. All things remote events.
In today's session, I got to welcome Brian Corcoran, the CEO of Turing Fest, a tech festival in Scotland. And they did exactly what we actually want every event organizer to do. They didn't take the original event and try to force it into a digital setup. They are trying out a completely new concept this year, and I'm really excited to hear about his learnings and his insights. So welcome, Brian. I'm happy that you're joining me today. How you doing?
Hey, Laura. Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Good.
First things first. What? Yeah. I just wanted to say, first things first, are you already in Christmas mode over there?
So my kids are. Yeah, I mean, I'm in Edinburgh, and Edinburgh at Christmas is actually really lovely. And yeah, it's starting to get more Christmassy. It's getting cold and snowy and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
So,
never been there.
Yeah, it's a cool city.
Okay.
Beautiful.
Okay. Brian, I already said like one sentence about you, and I guess there is a lot more. What else? Can you give us some details on you as a person? What should people know about you?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm from Dublin in Ireland originally, but it's quite a while since I lived in Ireland. Actually, I left Ireland in 2001. And I went to Spain.
Where?
And I was in Barcelona for 8 years. And I lived in the south of Spain before that, in Malaga and in Granada. Did university in Granada. But yeah, I went to Barcelona chasing a girl. Of course.
Of course. And, what else?
And then I was 8 years in Barcelona, and then met a different girl who is now my wife. And we, after the Barcelona time, 2009, at the end of 2009, we just sort of felt maybe it was time for a change. And we moved to Scotland. We moved to Edinburgh. I was, part of the reason for me was to do a startup here. So with a co-founder, a German co-founder actually, half German, half Scottish, hence the Scottish connection. So we moved here, and myself and my former co-founder did a startup together and learned a lot, and didn't succeed, but learned a lot through failure. And I've been in Scotland now for 10 years, which I never really expected, but there you go. And now I've got, one Brazilian wife and 2 Scottish children.
Cute. Well, this is unexpected, but okay, this is where everything started, basically. Nice. Before we start, Brian, I already announced it to you. We are, to get like a little bit more personal impression on you, I always do a short one or the other game. So it's pretty simple. No explanation needed at all. Just give me an answer on the statement I am going to drop. Sure. So we start with an easy one. Since you're up there close to England, coffee or tea?
Oh, coffee.
Oh, coffee. You rather go for a keynote or a discussion?
It's interesting. Probably keynote.
Yeah, okay. Sunday night, party or couch?
If you'd asked me a few years ago, it would have been party. Unfortunately, now it's probably couch.
And now you're forced to the couch right now, basically. Sweet or salty kind of person?
Salty, probably, yeah.
And do you prefer organizing or visiting events? Mean, right? That's a mean one.
Yeah. I get a real kick out of the conference and the events that we run. But it's a lot easier visiting for sure.
A bit more relaxed, probably.
But then some of the events you visit are not great, so
True. It's always about the experience. And coming to that, Brian, I mean, you, as most of us, or as many people in the event industry, you had to transform your event massively. You were kind of forced to it, and but to get a better understanding of where we're coming from, what was the origin of the Turing Fest? Like, how does it look like normally?
Yeah, so it started. But originally, it started in 2011. A friend of mine set it up. It was called Turing Festival then, and it was just a startup gathering. It didn't have a huge amount of kind of shape and structure to it. It was just a really fun get together over a few days in August in Edinburgh. That was always the kind of key thing. It was in August in Edinburgh when the Edinburgh Festival was on, because the Edinburgh Festival is a phenomenal experience. It's the biggest cultural event in the world. It's 500,000 people in Edinburgh over the course of August each year. It's really amazing. Like, there's 50,000 live shows.
So you share customers?
I mean, yeah, we probably have some overlap for sure. And then I took over the conference in 2016 because that pal of mine, he ran it as a side gig, and he was busy with lots of other things. So in 2016, I took it over, and I decided to shift the focus a little bit to be about building better startups, helping people build better startups. So it's an educational conference for people who are building startups. Normally we run 4 different tracks, if you like. We have a track called Build, which is for product builders, engineers, software designers, all the product side of things. Then Grow is the commercial and the customer facing side, so marketing, sales, customer success, etc. And then Lead, the third track, is leadership, strategy, culture, etc. And then we have a 4th track, which is a sort of separate event. Actually, it runs the day before or after. It's called Turing Founders, and that's founders and investors, and that's the money side.
Okay, and it's usually 2.5 days. And how many people are there, or how many people do you get together? Usually.
Yeah, across all of the components last year, we had about almost 3,000 people.
Oh, nice. Okay, that's fun.
Yeah, so it's starting to become a reasonably, reasonable sized event. It's by a long way, it's the biggest tech event in Scotland. But the idea is always to be an international event in Scotland rather than a Scottish event.
Okay, and now this year, as I said, as many of us, do you remember when you realized now is the point where we cannot do it this way? We have to change something. And how did it feel for you? I asked that everybody, all of my guests in the last sessions, but it's for each person, it's kind of an individual feeling.
Yeah, the first kind of warning sign I got, I didn't take very seriously. Perhaps I was at a conference. I think
nobody did.
Yeah, that's just true. I was at a conference in Manchester in February. Mind the Product, the really cool product organization. They run a bunch of conferences, and there was one speaker in particular that I wanted to meet and recruit, basically, to speak at Turing Fest. A guy called John Cutler from Amplitude. And he was like, "Oh yeah, Turing Fest. I've heard about it. I've heard it's great. I'd love to come. Sounds amazing." He goes, "The only thing is, like, with this pandemic that might happen, we might not be able to travel in August." And this is in early February. And I was like, really? I thought to myself, this was like typical Silicon Valley exaggeration, because John lives in the Valley. Turns out
he was right.
Yeah, he was. Our first instinct here, we were pretty resistant to going online, which is what we've had to do in the end, of course. So our in the first place, we tried to shift the conference from August back to October, in the hopes that would buy enough time. And also we had to negotiate with our venues and providers, stuff that we'd already contracted, etc. Those conversations were interesting because I think the way the world has played out, a lot of the clauses, etc., that were sort of people were talking about forcing back in March or April. I think once government shuts things down, all bets are off. So, yeah. But we decided, we tried to go back to October, and then we realized, I think really it was probably maybe around May or June, that ticket sales were not happening, sponsor sales were slow, and there was just so much uncertainty. Everybody was like, well, let's wait and see. And so we were like, well, we can't just wait and see forever. Let's make a call. So we shifted it back to, we shifted online. And now we've done this weird thing, which I guess we'll talk about.
This weird thing. Well, you said in the when we had our previous talk before the session, you told me that the Edinburgh Festival that you were just talking about, which is like big, counts into this entire festival or event vibe a little bit, that it helps shaping it. And this is actually something that is really hard to transform into the digital world. And you still set up the digital version of the Turing Fest, but what were like the main adjustments that you did when making the switch?
Yeah, I guess we when we first started thinking about it, we decided to kind of deconstruct what is a conference, what are the elements of a conference. I think we all have a much better understanding of the answers to that question now than we did 9 months ago. A conference certainly the type of conference that we run is normally a bunch of speakers who are there to help and educate. It's very much, Turing Fest is very much an educational conference for people building startups. We don't really have kind of TED Talk type stuff. Mm-hmm. We thought about, what does it mean? It means you've got a bunch of speakers, you've got a bunch of delegates, you've got a bunch of partners or sponsors in the expo, and you're connecting everybody, and everybody is there for that fixed period of time. And so really time and space are the things that push it all together or hold it all together, right? I'm going to go to X conference on that date because I know all the other people are going to be there. Whereas if it was running for a month, I might go that day, or I might go a different day, or whatever. So, and then we thought about as well just the idea of being at home, doing it all through your computer. And whilst there are attractive parts to that, we also thought about, everyone was pretty overloaded. I mean, it feels like it's calmed down quite a bit now, but in May or June, like I had my 2 kids at home, for example, with my wife and I both trying to work. So it was funny seeing on Twitter people going, oh, I've got nothing to do, I'm so bored. There's no work or whatever. Like I'd never been busier. My life was so scheduled. It was more scheduled than since I'd been in high school.
That's crazy. So you got rid of the time and space borders? Yeah,
we did. We just said, look, we decided that pretty early on that we didn't just want to transform, like just take an online conference or an offline conference and just stick it online for 2 days, because we didn't feel that would work. And because nobody, like I personally, when I go to a conference, if there's maybe like 10 speakers in a day, I'll never, ever watch 10 speakers. Mm. I might see 4 or 6 or, sometimes 1, because I'm also meeting people and just chatting and hanging out and checking out the expo and all those things that everyone does. And then to just expect people to sit at their computer for 10 talks just didn't make sense to me. Yeah. So we decided to break it up. And then it was a question of how much do we break it up and in what way? Because we felt that everyone was going to be under pressure for time, and the usual constraints that made it all work in the real world were absent. So we decided to change it quite radically in the end.
And you stretched it to like 3 months and thereby kind of made it more convenient and more accessible for people, or to that it fits better into the daily business. That's what I'm getting out of this. Was that the vision?
That was the idea. We decided we thought about making it over 10 weeks, and we thought that was a bit too long. 8 weeks was a better number. It's pretty arbitrary though, frankly. Yeah. And so the format that we came up with was 2 afternoons per week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, and we broke it into 2 different types of content. So Tuesday is networking and but mostly keynotes. So keynotes on those 3 tracks I mentioned earlier: build, grow, and lead. We took the Turing Founders piece. We've completely left aside for now. We haven't run Turing Founders this year. So Tuesdays is keynotes, build, grow, lead. So the three different kind of audiences we have all catered to with a keynote, 20-minute keynote plus Q&A. And they're on the hour, so 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock UK time. So kind of a 15-minute break in between each. And then Thursdays, roundtable discussions and an interview.
Okay. This sounds like, I really like the idea, because we had the same when we set up Pirate Life, the same idea behind it. And it's really about this, breaking it up to the core and making it accessible and making it flexible for people. But also it's like tons of work, because, I mean, we're not talking about the 2 days and then it's over. It's like 2 months or even more. So I can imagine that this is really crazy. But what I was wondering, you just stated in the beginning of your answer that that you would do things differently if you would do it again. Like, can you have like 3 main lessons for me, what you would change if you could do it, if you would start it over right now?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, I think after every conference I've ever run, there are lessons and there are things like, that thing didn't work at all. Let's not do it again. Or that thing really worked well. Let's do more of that. And for this time, so a couple of things that have the content has worked really well. I think for is my
content is something we stick with.
Yeah. I think the format of the content has been pretty good as well, and people have and the fact that it's on demand, so people can tune in live or they can watch the video later. But the videos are not available until after the live talk, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And so from a production perspective and a sort of experiential perspective, it becomes almost like a TV show.
Absolutely.
Which was a little, I think we kind of expected, but maybe didn't realize quite how much. And I think maybe 8 weeks is too long. I don't know. Certainly any longer than 8 weeks would feel a bit too much. Then it becomes a different thing. It becomes like a series of things rather than a conference. But from a tech perspective, we've used Swapcard as our main platform, and I don't think we'd use it again.
Okay, well, this is a good learning. We have content is key, which is super relevant. When you said that the time frame, don't overstretch it, right? And the technology behind it, this is like the most relevant thing. Otherwise, the whole experience is not as you want it to be.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing that online events, the hardest thing to get right with online events, and the biggest thing that most of them are missing in my experience, is the connecting people to each other. And you can connecting people in a structured and formal way is relatively doable. I think for online events, connecting people in a sort of serendipitous way is much harder.
Yeah.
So I think we would definitely, part of the lessons will be to focus more on that and getting people. Something a lot of people have said to me about this year in general is that they've kept in touch with their friends and their family a lot, and maybe more than ever, but they haven't met anybody new. Mm-hmm. And I think that is something that conferences can be really good at, right? So you have your conference. If you're in the conference industry and you end up at a lot of conferences, as you and I do, you end up with your conference pals. So they're people that you only really see at conferences. But if you're at a lot of conferences, you might see them more than some of your other friends. So conferences, and then you meet new people each time. And I love that. That's something that I think is such a fundamental part of conferences. And that's been difficult to replicate. And I think we would focus more on that. Because I think the biggest thing that's missing, like if you wanted to put it in one word, the biggest thing that's missing with online events is fun. Fun? Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, you should add something like speed dating or something.
Yeah.
Then you get a feeling for how many people are out there. And that is actually something I experience as really being fun, because there can come up so many interesting and valuable conversations, but in such a high frequency. So that's something you should keep in mind, maybe.
Yeah, we did think about that. So we just to be fair to Swapcard, when we chose them as a platform, it was before we decided that we had to go fully remote, fully online. So we were intending on kind of doing this hybrid hedge of like part online, part. And so Swapcard seemed like a good bet for that. When we ended up doing this kind of fully online, less so. I'm not sure any of the software is especially good, to be honest. It's either brand new software that's just been built and is full of bugs because it's so new, and kind of Hopin is maybe the best known. Hey Summit is another one which is good, and actually that's an Edinburgh-based company. I know the founder. He's regular, and maybe we would have been better off going with that. Or you've got these older platforms that are maybe a bit more stable, but they were basically built for different purpose, and they're being
less unsexy.
Yeah, and Swapcard was built as originally a companion tool for in-person events. So
yeah, I mean, there is a lot of development going on in this period. I just had that on a previous discussion with Pirate founder Manuel. And he was like, the behavior of us participants or of the event organizers was forced to change so rapidly, but the development of the technology was just too slow, or still is too slow. So this is why it's not satisfying yet. But and we try to do it the other way around and adjust our events to the possibilities that we have in the market right now. But what I was wondering as well, because you were talking about the experience itself, and I mean, at every event, doesn't matter if it's physical or digital, you have the different stakeholders, the participants, the speakers, the sponsors, and all of them have different expectations on what to get out of the event. And for each of them, it's kind of a different experience, and we want to get the most out of it for all of them. What would you say, which of these groups is the hardest to actually please?
Question. I think it depends on how you have your event structured, and depends what you've promised, I suppose, as well. And it maybe depends as well on how you've positioned, and something around price points. If an event is free to attend, maybe delegates have a lesser expectation than if an event is like 500 or 1,000 euros. But not always, I think, because they're still giving up their time, which is maybe the most expensive and valuable thing. I think with our experience with online, or my general view is that for an event like ours, you kind of have a hierarchy that you need to keep happy. And I think it's not, it's a bit sort of counterintuitive, because your sponsors are the ones that give you they're the ones that give you the most money on a sort of a per unit basis. But then your delegates, without them, you wouldn't have the sponsors, et cetera, et cetera. But actually for an event like Turing Fest, it all comes back to the speakers. And so I think if your speakers, I think you really need to look after your speakers. And if you don't, you're in big trouble, because if speakers are not happy, whether they want to or not, they transmit that they're not happy.
True.
And it's, some of them some of them can be pretty like directly aggressive about it on stage. Like, oh my God, the hotel I stayed in was so shit. That kind of stuff. But sometimes they're just like not in a great mood because they're at the event and they don't feel they've been looked after or well treated or whatever. And it just comes across in their presentation. And if it comes across, then the crowd feels it, the audience feels it, and then they have that negative energy. And then they go into the expo in the lunch break or whatever, and they're not really interested in talking to the sponsors because it's all just a bit negative. And so you have this cascade. So I think if you look after your speakers, I think that's your number one job. Keep your speakers happy. They're the ones that put the energy into the event in a lot of, depending on the type of event again, but certainly for us. Okay. So if they're happy and if they transmit that, and if they do a great job, which invariably they do at Turing Fest, then your delegates are happy, and then they have those engaging conversations with all the partners and sponsors, et cetera. And so you have the sort of positive net effect flows through the whole thing.
Yeah. And I mean, as you said, they are becoming kind of the ambassadors of the event. I mean, actually, everybody does, also the participants. If they are like part of the event and they really live the event, then it's even more successful. And I think in a digital setup, this is really hard to get everybody where they want to be, but it's so much even more relevant in the digital setup to do proper expectation management, to show like the speakers as well as the participants as well as the sponsors how they can get the most out of their digital experience, because it's a different one for each of them. And for example, for the sponsors, push them proactively into how they can get these valuable connections that they want. And for the speakers, as you said, give them the feeling with tech checks and so on, so they can really feel comfortable in this unknown digital setup, and then spread this positive vibe towards the participants who on that side have more fun. So it's like a nice circle. Yeah, really good. What I wanted to ask you as well is like, when we're looking ahead, like a little bit more prospectively on, and let's say maybe physical events are coming back, this future is unknown, is like a crystal ball. But did you think about, do you do Turing Fest next year again in a digital way? Or would you say, nope, if we can do a physical event, no chance to do like the digital way? Do it the digital way.
Yeah. I guess a lot of us are thinking about that question at the moment.
Wait, let me phrase it differently. If there is like one heart of the digital version of Turing Fest, is there something that you would keep if you could do physical again?
Yeah, I think there is.
What is that?
Yeah, so it's live streaming, I think, and the sort of broadcast element. So we thought about this in the past, and we always shied away from the broadcast side of it because we thought it might devalue the experience for the delegates who paid to be there. It might cannibalize ticket sales, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of rethinking that. Because one thing that's really come out of this year, I think, for the conference industry, for the conferences that make it through this, because a lot of them will not. If you go back to April, May, I saw loads of people on Twitter, heard loads of friends and colleagues talking about online events, and people were really happy about it. Everyone was like, oh, this is so great. You don't have to get on a plane or a train. You don't have to get a hotel. I'm saving so much money and I can do it all from home. It's so much easier and I'm getting the same content or blah, blah, blah. And then by the time you get to maybe like July or August, definitely September, everyone's like, oh my God, online events. I'm so sick of them. So I think something that everyone's realized, conference organizers, delegates, sponsors, everyone, is that the in-person connection is it's invaluable, and it's the real reason that we have conferences. And even though the content can be extremely good in many conferences and is ostensibly the reason people go, I think if you take away the networking and the serendipity and the fun, and just the feeling of being in the crowd, it's a very different and much reduced experience. So but to go back to your question, the broadcast side of it, though, we've learned this year that can be a really good thing, and that you can make something very valuable out of that. So I think because the in-person experience, to my mind, is so much better, I think we will. I'm less afraid of the broadcast side of it cannibalizing, if you know what I mean, because I think you just create two different price points, or an in-person ticket costs X. A remote ticket cost Y, or maybe it's free. All of that stuff needs to be weighed up. Yeah. Business questions. But I think we will do some sort of broadcast of Turing Fest, which we've never done before.
Yeah, and this is, as you just said, you have the in-person experience in that case, but you can easily like enlarge it or widen it up to like a much broader audience when you add things like, for example, a live broadcast. And as you said, content is key. And if you have that content, why not stream it to everywhere?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it depends on the wider strategy of your business and your business model and all of those things. But yeah, I think it's going to be one of the effects of the year of remote conferences that will stay, is that I think broadcast is going to be much more part of it from now on.
Before we are reaching the end of this this little talk, you just said, this is more like a negative point, but you just said some might not get through. What would you say, Brian? What is the greatest challenge beside COVID that our industry of event organizers is currently facing?
Yeah, I mean, well, the obvious one for a lot of events in the near term is just cash and getting through. You know, we're pretty happy with how Turing Fest has gone, but it's, you know, from a business model perspective, it's definitely been something we've had to adapt to. You know, the costs in online events are generally a lot lower, but I think the revenues typically are too. And maybe that can change over time as everybody understands the model better and people get better at, you know, if you normally have 1,000 people in your building, maybe you can get 10,000 or 100,000 on your platform online, and you can monetize in different ways, and it can all make sense. But I think that'll all unfold over the next few years, and some people will definitely be really good at that. Yeah. But I beyond the immediate sort of cash crunch, I think there's definitely going to be a challenge for some around, I guess, convincing people to go back in the building, convincing people to spend the money for the in-person ticket, to get the hotel and the flight and all of that. You know, I think business travel in general is going to be significantly reduced over the next few years. And then the flip side of that, or the knock-on effect of that, is the sponsor side. You know, does it make sense still for a sponsor to send a 5-person team, you know, across the other side of a continent for 3 days and spend, you know, quite a lot of money? Or can they get those leads online in another way? You know, and for some people, the answer to that would be yes, and for others, the answer would be no. Let us back into events as soon as possible.
Yeah, and that's probably why both kind of events, the physical and the digital ones, will survive.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think there will be some casualties. We'll definitely lose some, like in every sector. I mean, I was walking around Edinburgh this morning, saw lots of restaurants, cafes, bars, where, you know, they're for sale, or the properties for lease. I was in a hotel this morning for the first time in I don't know how long, because I just wanted somewhere out of the cold to do some work. And a hotel was a 200-room hotel. They had 5 people staying in it.
Oh.
And hotels in Edinburgh are normally booked out all the time.
Talking about the costs, right? No, but what I wanted to add to your cost perspective is that I'm totally with you that the business models of a lot of event organizers will change, or that we have to adjust them. Because as you just said, digital does not necessarily mean cheap. If you want to do a great digital experience, if you want to build it, then you have to invest the money. And if the future will be that you add the digital elements to the physical ones, then it's going to be even more expensive for us to set it up in the right way. So you have to adjust that general idea behind it for sure.
Yeah. And I think the standard this year, if you think about from most online events, you know, we've seen something like SaaStr, which is this huge software conference in California, where they normally spend a ton of money on their stage sets and the production or whatever. And this year it's been like the whole thing's just been on Zoom.
Yeah, it's crazy. But it's great. It's great.
Yeah, it is. And I think that's shifted, you know, like we're seeing, you know, the newsreaders on BBC or, you know, national broadcasters literally in their kitchen reading the news. So it's definitely shifted some perceptions and expectations around broadcast. But I do think that, and this year just everyone's been online because there's been no choice. Some conferences will go on to specialize in online, and I think their production values will go up and up and up, and they'll end up being super, super slick, I'm sure.
Super slick. Brian, as always, I'm going to close with my last question, which I most of the time already know the answer before you actually answer it. But would you say, are remote events here to stay?
I think in some form and some components, yeah. They're
going to be slick.
Yeah, but they'll need to be slick. I think I think maybe the other way to look at that question is, are we going to go back to in-person only events? And I think the answer to that is definitely no.
Yeah. And that was a great closing statement, and I'm totally with you on that one. So thank you so much, Brian, for sharing your insights, for sharing your lessons, and all the best for the last days of the Turing Fest. And thanks everybody for joining today. That was it. Talking to Brian from Scotland, and take care and goodbye.
PIRATEx Deep Dive. All things remote events.